Hi, I'm Mark. Welcome back to Foothill Paint Fabrication. Well, today on Project Ruby, we're going to do some block sanding on the quarter panel on the driver's side and see how much filler it's going to take. Do a little filling and get that roughed out today. I hope we can get that knocked out. But before we do that, I want to kind of bring up a few things. While we're roughing that out, we're going to have a lot of deep sand scratches. And those things can come back to haunt you if you don't follow a few simple steps. So I've got some materials out here. We're going to talk a little bit about where they come from, how to avoid sand scratches, and really just the best practices to do some of this stuff. We're also going to do some filling, and I want to cover some best practices on that. There are multiple ways of doing this stuff, guys, so just because I'm doing it one way doesn't mean your way is wrong. There's just really good ways of doing it, and then just other ways of doing it. But let's jump in here and get right to this, take a look at this stuff, and get over to the car. Okay guys, I got some materials here. I just built this rack day before yesterday, and that's holding this Duragold PSA sandpaper. So I've got some 40 grit, 60 grit, 80 grit, 100 grit, 120, and 180. I've never used 60 grit my whole life, so I think it'll be a good transition from 40 to 80. Just kind of throw that in there maybe. And when you're blocking out, the key is using coarse sandpaper. You got your 40 grit. I even had 36 grit, but boy, it leaves some heavy scratches and gouges in the body filler or the primer. So I've got some 40 grit on this Dura block right here. This one, it's got some fine sandpaper that's going to be peeled off. I was messing around. But when you're blocking out, if you use too fine a sandpaper, even let's say an 80 grit, you're going to be bearing down more. You're going to be pushing in more to make that stuff work harder, right? And the problem is you're distorting the panel. And we want a nice, smooth, flat, whatever shape it is, we want that to not have any ripples in it, right? It may be curved, but it's going to be a beautiful curve, not one with little waves in it. And that's what we're all shooting for in the end. Now, use coarse sandpaper to block out, and that's the way to go. The problem is a lot of people, and I've seen professional shops do it, I've seen guys on YouTube do it, professionals do it. They'll rough stuff out. I saw a guy strip a car with like, I don't know what it was, 40 grit or something, and then just spray epoxy on it. And oh, it'll fill those scratches. Sure, it will fill those scratches, but the thing to remember, all these materials, body filler, primers, epoxies, urethanes, polyester primers here, single stage, they all shrink. If you do not let them outgas and let them shrink long enough, you're going to block it out and think you got all those scratches out, and then it will shrink down inside that, and then you'll have a sand scratch. So being patient is your friend in all of these, and that's the best way to avoid sand scratches. Also, you don't want to go 40 grit and then just pile on a bunch of polyester primer, urethane, or an epoxy, because you're asking too much of the product. All right, this product wasn't really designed to do that. Okay, so if you've got some heavy scratches, get a glazing putty, a catalyzed glazing putty, and fill those in. That's more what it's designed for. If you do pile on a bunch of primer of your choice, let it sit as long as you can. If it's summertime, try to put the panel or the car out in the sun. Let the sun just help all the solvents come out. You say, well, this is epoxy. I put catalyst in. I put catalyst in the polyester primer. So it hardens, it doesn't dry. It does harden, but it does have solvents in it. All of these have solvents in it that have to evaporate. And when they evaporate, the material shrinks. The thicker your body filler, the more it shrinks. The thicker your primer, the more it shrinks, okay? So try to block out, using 40 grit, kind of rough it down, and then when you get it, roughed into your shape, then you can move to maybe a 60 or an 80 to start to smooth it out, and just so you're not pushing down hard. That's the key. Then you're closer to where like a polyester primer, a urethane filler primer, or even epoxy primer. Then you're not asking so much of it, and you're going, you won't get sand scratches later on. So I was in OPGI. I'll tell you a quick story. I was in OPGI waiting for my hood and some other parts to be brought out. They have a beautiful green GTO in the lobby. They have just rows and rows of cars in the back. I peeked back there. They're just beautiful cars. This car was painted by a local body shop, a really good body shop from what I'm told. And so I'm looking the car over like I do, and the left quarter panel, it's a beautiful green car. Right where it goes from the quarter panel and up to the sail panel, there's sand scratches right there. And I know those sand scratches weren't there when that car left their shop. What happens is body shops work quick, okay? And that's what gets you. You know, you don't let stuff shrink, you don't let stuff outgas, and then the car's done, and then 6 months later you're washing the car in the sun, you're like, oh my, where are these sand scratches? I was so careful, I used guide coat, I used everything. Well, it's from the material shrinking. You left some big scratches, you try to fill it with something else, it shrank, then the stuff on top shrank, and you can see them in the clear or the color. So just take your time, let the sun help you, let time be your friend, and just don't, you know, rough something out with 40 grit, pile on a bunch of epoxy and think you're gonna be safe. If you wait long enough, you will be safe. But if you got super deep gouges, you know, hit them with some glazing, catalyzed glazing putty or something if you don't want to sand a little finer with maybe some 80 grit. So let's cover some of the stuff we got here real quick. Of course, I got my Duro blocks, the long one, the other long one. I've got this stuff I use, the lightweight on the firewall. This is a little bit older, it's been in the shelf. It's a good overall body filler, you know, general body filler. I've got some Rage Gold, which we'll be using on the outside. This spreads a little better, it's less prone to pinholes, and it's just a nicer, it's obviously, it's double the cost of this, you know. So, and then of course I've got the epoxy primer sealer right here. I've got some polyester primer. I love this stuff for lower end stuff. You know, it does a great job. But we will be using epoxy all the way to the top. I don't have any urethane primer right here, right now, but you can use that as well. And of course, this speed prime right here, this is really old, but it's you don't use a catalyst. You just put it in the gun and spray. And it's good for doing, you know, little crappy jobs around the farm or the shop. So, but all these shrink, okay? I've got my sandpaper, I got my long boards. So it's just important to know that, okay, I've got 40 grit here, and then we're gonna do some 60 grit, and then we're gonna do some 80 grit, and I'm gonna be patient when I'm blocking out. So for the car today, I think what we're gonna do, we've got 2 good coats of epoxy on the car. I'm gonna start off with some 100 grit on one of these blocks, and maybe I think we'll put it on this one, and just kind of go over maybe the top and that left quarter panel, and then we'll just kind of take a look, see how it looks. All right, guys, we're on the driver's side rear quarter panel. So what I want to do is work this area right here and stay maybe 1.5 foot away from the door jamb. We'll do that area when the door is attached and we can block right across it. So the idea here is I've got my 30-inch Duro block. I've got some 100 grit on it, and you can see I've got like 4-inch segments on here. Now, if you put a solid piece on here, especially the thicker stuff, when you go to curve it, because this quarter panel's curved a little bit, it wrinkles, okay? So I've never tried this before. We're gonna give it a try right now and see if that helps, because when you get wrinkles in there, then it starts digging in, and that's no good. So I don't know if this is gonna work. We'll give it a shot. The idea by using the 100 grit is to kind of, you know, block the epoxy out a little bit, show the high and low spots, kind of work those if we have to pick them down or we have to use some filler. This should make it, this should expose it. And I don't want to go through the epoxy. I want epoxy between whatever we put on top here. So if I go through to bare steel, I don't want to put body filler over the top of that. When we start doing some filling, we'll talk about body filler over bare steel opposed to epoxy and other stuff. But let's go ahead and get some blocking out done here. I don't want to push hard. I bought a lot of sandpaper, so I switch it often so I don't end up trying to use an old worn out piece of sandpaper. I'm barely pushing down. And look how crappy that looks already. So we've got a lot, it's touching, you know, all over here and there, but there are low spots, and I knew that was going to be the case. This is the quarter panel we put on, and we worked so hard to, you know, kind of repair some of those old dents. But yeah, let me keep hitting it a little bit, and then we'll see how this whole area looks. All right, guys, you can see it's just trying to touch in some of these spots. Other spots, it's doing pretty good. But I can tell, just running my hand over it, that we need to skim coat this whole quarter panel and then block it out. But I kind of knew I was going to have to do that anyways. I did the best I could on the sheet metal, and then I have to let filler do the rest for me, you know, to help me out. But this area looks pretty good. We had a lot of dents and a lot of stuff going on. You guys remember we had to shrink it, push it, pull it, everything to get this, try to get the general shape back in there. Over here, it's starting to look a lot better. Of course, we're away from that massive dent. And then we're gonna stop right about in here. So this all looks pretty good right through here. I'm gonna go ahead and kind of switch over to another block, I think a little bit smaller, just to get around some of these corners here, and then we'll see where we're at. So I'll bring you back in just a minute. All right, guys, we pretty much exposed everything we've got going on. I did some work around the corner here. It's looking okay. Up along the body line here, we got a little low spot here and there. It's looking pretty good. We're okay. The body line right here has got a little dent in it, and we come along here, it's looking pretty good. Got a little shiner right there, got some low spots around it. I'm not going to tap that down because we have bare steel showing. The idea is for me to not to have any body filler on bare steel if I can help it. So we'll fill that, and if it comes back out, we'll tap it down and then get some epoxy over it. Then we'll come back through over here. We can see that we have a low spot around where I push that dent out, and then the mess over here. Now, I'm not the greatest at sheet metal. I'll be the first to admit it. Working dents that have already been worked once before is tough. I mean, somebody else had already worked it, and then I get in there and try to make it better or do, make it worse, whatever. But we got good shape in it, and that's what I always talk to you guys about. So these aren't massively low spots, but they are low. So if we look along here, you can kind of see them, right? So, and that's what we're going to use body filler for. I'm not the greatest sheet metal guy, but I can sand body filler. So we're looking not too bad. I mean, it could have been a lot worse. So the next step is to go in and rough all these areas out really well so the body filler will adhere to them. I went ahead and did the sail panel as well. I don't know if it's showing up on camera here, but you can see right here, we've got a little low spot. There we go. And then this is where I didn't run the lead all the way down. There's a low spot right in here. So, and we're a little low on my leading, but I did put like 3 or 4 coats of epoxy on here, and it did bring most of that out. It's really hard to get a good angle on it for you, but this all needs to be filled as well. So it's not looking horrible. I mean, I think that looks pretty good. We're just gonna have to get some body filler on this. So let me grab a piece of sandpaper, and what I'm gonna do is hand sand all these spots so they're all roughed up and ready for body filler. All right, guys, I got that panel all roughed up with some 60 grit, so everything is ready to go. But before we put any of the body filler on there, I want to talk a little bit about body fillers. So this is a good general use lightweight body filler. It's a little thicker, it's harder to spread. The Rage Gold, I think there's one more, it's Ultra. I've never used the Ultra, but this stuff is easier to spread, which makes it less likely to have pinholes. But the build is a little bit harder. Now, some you don't want to sag, some you're putting thin skin coats, so it doesn't matter. So this will tend to sag a little bit more than this one. So there's, I don't know, there's got to be 50 different styles. I know Evercoat makes probably 5 or 6 different body fillers themselves. So you kind of have to figure out what you want to do and why, what it's designed for. Now, best practices. If you guys watch this channel for any length of time, you saw on the 50 Chevy that I put body filler directly on bare steel. I've been asked about that, comments and stuff like that. Now, that truck had multiple repairs all over it, still had factory paint on bare steel. So in that instance, putting an epoxy or some sort of etching compound or something down isn't really going to help, an area this big, right? So, but on a car like Ruby, where we're starting from scratch down to bare steel, best practice is, if you can afford it, is put epoxy down and then apply body filler to the epoxy. I'll show you a little quick clip here. Now you can see that that body filler that I pried off there, rust underneath it. Body filler is porous. It will absorb moisture, it will absorb water. So if, let's say somehow you get a chip in your paint and it goes all the way down to the body filler, that body filler will absorb water. It could leach all the way down to your bare steel, and then you could have a problem, right? So that's why I'm trying to, the best I can, I'm not going to be perfect, keep that barrier of epoxy between the steel and the body filler and everything else, all the other elements. So that's why I'm doing it that way. If you put body filler over bare steel, that's the way we did it for years and years and years. That was standard practice. Grind it down to bare steel, apply the body filler, and then, you know, put your primers and everything above that. The best way now that I know of is get epoxy down and put the body filler over it. Doesn't mean if you guys are, you know, stripping your car down to bare steel, skim coat the whole thing with body filler and block it down, then put epoxy on it. That's good too, okay? I'm not saying your way is wrong. I'm just saying probably best practices if you're trying to be as good as you can be, like I'm trying to do on this job, is get some epoxy down. And everybody has an opinion on that. So, you know, just keep that in mind. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix up a batch. I'll meet you back over at the car and we'll see if we can't get this stuff spread around nice and even and thin on the quarter panel. All right, it's been blown off and I actually tacked it off twice, so it's dust free. So I'm gonna go hit the low spots I know for sure, then we're gonna try to skim over the whole thing. All right, we got it all on there. It's time for the secret weapon. This is actually I've been using it to trim wallpaper, but I've used it for this before. And it works pretty good. All right, it's looking pretty good. Got a few spots here and there, but we're not going to be able to get it perfect. All right, let's leave it right there. All right, let me get cleaned up. I'll get the heater over here. We'll get this stuff set up. All right, guys, since I had that 100 grit already loaded up, I went ahead and did the other quarter panel, and that one's looking a lot better than the driver's side, that's for sure. It actually just has these few low spots here, one there, and a couple little tiny ones, and they're very shallow. Might even be able to block some more of that out, but it's looking really good. I did the sail panel as well. You can see the factory leading is better than mine, no surprise there. But they still had some low spots in there, so we'll go ahead and get those scuffed up and filled. I went ahead and did the top as well. We have one little spot over here where they drilled a hole for to let the air out when it was being dipped. I TIG welded that in, but I could not hammer and dolly it because it was right on the top of a brace. So it's looking good. So I think what I'll do is just hit that one little spot with some body filler and then block the whole thing out with 80 grit. I'm not worried about going through up there because it's all going to get more epoxy on top of it. So if there's some shiners, some steel showing, it's not the end of the world. So this is all set up. I hit it with the DA to break it open. So the stickiness is gone, and I just kind of knocked some of the high spots down with that. We're going to put some 40 grit on that longboard and see what we can do. All right, I remembered I had some 40 grit on the 24-inch Durablock, so I'm going to use it. It spans most of this area anyways. The other one's a little long to get down in here, so we're going to rough it out with this. So let's get after it. All right, it's actually feeling really good, looking good. We got some epoxy starting to come through here. It's really thin, it's flexible, so we're good there. But we do have some low spots here. We got a couple right over here, got one or two up here, little tiny ones here and there. So I don't want to keep sanding trying to get those out. Now they very well may sand out, but if I start concentrating out just trying to get them out, then I'll probably put a flat spot here, and that's not what we want. So I'm going to mix up a little baby batch of body filler, and I'll probably do up here so I can work this body line a little bit, and we'll get these low spots filled in, and then I think I'll do just the top of the car, that one little spot, and then that'll be done and out of the way. So let me take care of that, and I'll bring you right back, and we'll keep sanding on this thing, see how it looks. All right, guys, we are getting somewhere. It's starting to look pretty good, feels pretty good. I even started picking down some of these high spots. Because I know I'm not going to put any more body filler, so those will get epoxy once I let this shrink a little bit and outgas. So I got a couple down there, got one over here I tapped down. We still need to tap this one down, so let's grab the hammer, tap that down, and we're going to work this body line right here. Okay, I've got my hammer. This came with a really sharp point on it, and what I did, I dressed that down into more of a dull point. And all we're going to do is just tap around the perimeter of this shiner just in from the edge, and then work our way to the middle. Not very hard, we're just tapping down just barely. All right, that'll probably do it, and then we're going to sand it and see if those tap marks get sanded out and if this area starts flattening out. So let me back the camera away and we'll start working this body line. All right, I just had somebody ask me my opinion about using guide coat on body filler, and I told them, yes, I have on smaller areas, and but I like to kind of rough it out and then get some primer on it, then use the guide coat. What I forgot to mention was body lines, and I use guide coat quite a bit to show body lines. You just can't see them. You can't see if they're straight, you can't see how you're doing, nothing. So I will use guide coat on body lines to get just to expose it so you can see if you're getting it right, because they're very hard to get to look nice and smooth. And I'm sure you guys have all seen cars where the body line kind of wanders up and down a little bit, and that's not what we want. So let me start sanding this, and we'll see how we're looking. All right. Okay, we can see it's hitting right along here, but we're a little low right there. And I just picked this one down, so I kind of think this area is a little high anyways, so I want to work that back down. Okay, so now you can see that body line is becoming much more distinct. See, we got a really nice line right there. It's low right here. This is looking good. This is looking good here. Now this body line is not a crisp, sharp line. It's a big rollover. And in fact, this quarter panel comes up to about here. Then it starts to roll. Then it goes into the roll of the body line and then back up to here. So I believe this is a little too flat. It probably needs to roll over a little bit more. So I'm going to keep working it, and I'll bring you back and we'll see how it looks. All right, we got that body line roughed in pretty nice. It's looking really good. Got a nice gradual curve, no ups and downs, no hoop-de-doos in it. This seems still a little low right here. I think it's because this is a little high. I'm going to tap that down and do some more sanding, but it's looking really good. And of course, this is a sharp line right now. I will take some really fine sandpaper, maybe some 240, and round that over so it matches the factory line See, it's a lot more, it's more of just a round body line than a nice sharp crisp one. So we want to do that before we get any epoxy on here, but it's looking really good. Let me bust that out real quick, and I think we're going to wrap this one up. That corner panel looks a lot better than it did when I started, that's for sure. All right guys, let's take a close-up look. I want to make sure you guys see everything. I don't want to hide anything. Now this is real world. Now, not my proudest moment on sheet metal work, but I worked my butt off trying to get that better, and I just had to stop and let the body filler help me out, which it did here. And you can tell we're in through the epoxy in a few spots. We've got some shiners. They will get epoxy over the top of them, and the ones I tapped down I did really well on, except this one down here, a little heavy-handed, so after we get epoxy on it, it may need some filler. We'll see, but all in all, I'm really happy. Now I did 40 grit, 80 grit, and then I finished with 100 grit, and there's not a lot of sand scratches, deep ones in here. There are a few, but not bad. So I'm going to let this outgas. I'm going to continue to work on other parts of the car while this sets, and then even roll this thing out in the sun, you know, on a sunny day, and let it warm up a little bit and kind of finish shrinking, and then we'll get some epoxy on all our repairs. But I'm really happy to get this busted out and kind of get that little eyesore out of my eyesight, so I can move on to the easier panels. Okay guys, that pretty much wraps up this video on getting a skim coat on the quarter panel, getting it blocked out really nice, and covering some best practices to prevent sand scratches. So they can come back to haunt you, so be careful. You know, work your way through the grits. Don't get too fine, because then you start putting waves in it when you're just roughing it out, right? You can get another coat of primer on there, then switch to a little bit finer sandpaper, and it's going to start showing stuff. So you kind of inch up on getting the panel super flat. You don't get it right off the bat. This one is not perfect right off the bat, but it's really, really close. And then the primer can help us get to the next step, right? We use body filler to get us here. Then we're going to use some high build, in this case, high build epoxy to get us to the next step, right? So I hope you guys got something out of this video. Let me know if you did. If you got any questions, let me know. I'm not an expert, but I'll tell you how I've been doing it all these years and why, and you guys can decide how to cover it yourself. Thanks for joining me here at Foothill Paint Fabrication. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Mash that bell and drop me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next one.